As you all, I think, know, I'm Penny Siddall and I'm the Digital Skills and Adoption Programme Manager in Dorset Council's Digital and Change Service. And I'm joined by Greg and James today. I'm going to start by setting out why we're talking about shaping a rural digital future. Then I'll introduce Greg and James and let them talk about how that rural digital future is shaping up. So, why do we think we have anything useful to say on a rural digital future? Well, we have form. We in the Council's Digital Place team have been talking to our residents and stakeholders for some time about the direction we want Dorset to head. Last summer, when we were beginning to understand the impact of the pandemic on digital adoption, we held Dorset Reloaded. You may have come to that. It was a virtual event which reviewed the picture from the year before, when we had met 100 stakeholders at Kingston Moorwood College, Dorchester. And this is what we found. So, oh no, can you go back to the previous one? Thanks. So lots of ideas there, not clearly described, broadly in 4 topic areas, but with no sense of priorities or anything like that. But it was a really good start. And these iterations, this one and the one from the previous year from Kingston Moorwood College, reflected the journey of Dorset Council to see itself as a digital council in a digital place. And we see the keys being connectivity, skills, and leadership, which come together to enable use. Thank you. So this is the simple version. The meatier alternative is the digital vision, which is the next slide. And that has 5 cross-cutting enablers: digital skills and inclusion, designing future services, technology and infrastructure, culture and leadership, and data and intelligence. And 2 themes: becoming a digital council and enabling Dorset to become a digital place. And through that digital vision journey, we look at digital maturity, which measures our progress. And we continue to engage with our stakeholders at every opportunity. In October, we held Festival of the Future, which I think probably all of you will be aware of. That was part of Digital Leaders Week last year. We held over 60 virtual events on everything digital. Well, everything really. From AV1 avatars, which allow pupils to engage with classmates at school, even though they're actually in a hospital bed, unable to move, through to chair yoga for the Home Office. From storytelling to influence decision makers, through to designing our services by starting with the user and their needs. By maintaining conversation with our residents and businesses, partners and customers, celebrating their digital successes as well as our own, and developing projects with shared outcomes, we hope to create a common vision of our rural challenges and goals and the work needed to overcome the challenges and realise the goals. So when the DCMS Select Committee published Broadband and the Road to 5G, their report into the government's plans for achieving its target of full fibre connectivity by 2025, we felt we were well placed to respond on behalf of rural areas. Well, I say we, actually by that stage, we had a whole lot of new partners working with us on the 5G Rural Dorset Testbed and Trials programme. So our consultant, Greg Paul from Strathclyde University, and James Price, our communications officer from the project team, thought that they would like to respond to that DCMS report. And between the 3 of us, we developed a plan. We invited some digital leaders from Dorset and beyond to facilitate topic breakout rooms. We invited our loyal local stakeholders back once more to give us their ideas for Dorset's future and tell us what we needed to do to make it happen. And we listened. So Greg's keynote was so great, we thought we'd give you a précis of what a rural future could hold. So he's going to talk to you first, and then James is going to cover the key areas from each of the topic areas. Greg, over to you.
Thanks. So when we started this, we looked at how we got here, and in many ways in recent years, actually, the way people interact with technology and the way they see the world and even interact with it has changed an awful lot. We've seen over the last year that technology can bring people closer together. It can keep people in touch, but sometimes, people have obviously been a bit worried about over-reliance on technology and, as the picture suggests, this sort of trend to viewing the world through the phone screen. So we need to not lose sight of the fact that we have to make sure that as we make progress, people are kept on board. Let's move to the next one, James. Then 2020 hit and everything really changed. We saw what I think we could probably call the biggest forced digital transformation ever imaginable or not imaginable. It's a scale that's completely unprecedented in any other situation. Businesses had to move from working 5 days a week, in an office for the same 8 hours a day, and suddenly overnight that changed and they moved to embrace home working in ways we've never seen before wherever they really could. And we went from, in a way, going from digital optional to digital first and indeed digital only in many cases. And we saw a pace of change that was never seen before. It wasn't perfect and things haven't been planned or designed in the way they should, but it worked and it happened. And now what we need to do is make sure that we can actually try and sort of backfill some of the problems that come about from trying to move everything online in one fell swoop. So many of these challenges can come from things like access to connectivity, access even to the devices needed to utilize connectivity, and the skills and knowledge and experience that you need to use them effectively online, and all these digital skills. And that plays into what Penny was saying there. And as sort of many people will have said in the past, well, we'll use the library. Well, the library isn't the golden digital bullet in a way, because it can't always fix everyone's problems. And when libraries close, we have to make sure people stay online and accessible. And we thought about what 10 years of aspirations might look like for Dorset, not necessarily bounded in any particular way, but just sort of thinking about the bigger picture. Let's go to the next one, James. So in 2012, for context here, which is, not quite 10 years ago, but it's close enough. And we've got a nice big landmark here. The UK was preparing for the Olympics. Dorset was gearing up to host the sailing and put itself on the map. We didn't have 4G. 4G hadn't launched in 2012 in the UK. The internet on your phone was 3G. The last time I was on a train journey through Dorset or Southampton or even anywhere down on the south coast, I was back to 2012 or earlier. Not back to the future, forward to the past. I was sat there on 3G, barely able to get online on the train. Huge amounts of the country are stuck with 2012 era connectivity, or actually 1990s era connectivity. We're seeing 5G build out from the big towns and cities. Very slow pace in the grand scheme of things. It's much slower pace of rollout than previously because it works across a much shorter distance. But it's clear that our connectivity needs might not be as they were planned. This focus on urban environments. Well, if you take a look in the news, you'll see that the big trend is everyone moving away from the cities now and moving towards Dorset rather than away. Let's go to the next one, James. We've come a long way for our early mobile phones. I mean, you could say, well, these aren't mobile, but I would disagree. And I would say, actually, you were mobile and the phone was there for you to use when you were mobile. But more seriously on so if you just go back for a sec, I'll come to that one in a second. But it's more seriously on that point though. A little bit of news. It's actually 75 years to the day since the very first truly mobile phone call was made. It was made from a car on the 17th of June in 1946. The equipment to make it work actually filled your entire boot up, but it worked. And within 2 years, there were 5,000 customers. It then took us 30 years to actually advance from that to a handheld phone. And in saying that, that was still a handheld phone that, was chunky and, had barely lasted on the battery. Let's go to the next one. So let's keep that in context as we think about the pace of change. So when we think about digital places and shaping our digital future, we know that mobile connectivity is important. We have to remember mobile connectivity is useless without the wired and fixed connectivity that gets us connectivity to the mast. First thing you need to build a mobile network is copper or fibre that gets you your equipment online and onto the network. And we need to start to think how we design our broadband networks to get people online at home as well. Last year, there was a question asked in the House of Lords about why farmers were having to go to the local McDonald's to get online so that they could fill in government forms and do their DEFRA reporting. We see the universal service obligation. It's far from universal, and £3,400 per residential premise is simply not enough when people are being quoted six-figure sums to get connectivity to their house. Let's go to the next one. We need to make sure, though, that we don't overlook the importance of connectivity to people, especially the vulnerable, the infirm, and those that are really reliant on this connectivity to keep in touch. When the power goes off today, the phone exchange puts power down your phone line, and that keeps it up working for about 5 days after the power goes out. When you move towards fibre connectivity, though, and there's plans to get this everywhere for good reason to increase speeds, you're going to lose this resilience, and we'll see people left with about 1 hour of battery backup if they're vulnerable. And actually no battery backup for people who aren't on the vulnerable service register. Now, this sounds hard to solve, and let's be honest, this is not easy. But the end goal for rural communities is actually, quite important here. The future of work isn't necessarily clear, and who knows what the future months hold. But there's something clear, is that there's change coming. Remote working, partial or full work from home, these are really in demand, and people are actually now talking about quitting their jobs rather than returning to the office in full. And this is an opportunity for rural areas to get their connectivity up to speed, get that investment, and actually start to draw people in from the cities in pursuit of what rural life's got to offer them. And that means we need to redesign and rethink how we build things. We design our networks urban first, but that might not actually deliver the return on investment that the operators think that they're going to get as people move to rural areas. We need to make sure that we help people catch up in terms of urban, getting rural areas to the level of urban connectivity. But we also need to make sure that we think bigger, because the assumption that people work in an office or a business park where you need the good fibre is not the case. The offices of the country, and indeed the world, are now people's homes. And that's what we need to do, is make sure that we get the connectivity to their home. I think we're going to start to see connectivity to the home actually become more important than proximity to the train station as people start to look at, locations and properties. But we've also got to remember, though, it's not just about technology, and the increased connectivity can bring about lots of opportunities as well, but that's also going to bring requirements around skills, particularly digital skills and training and, use and understanding of technology. But the benefits and upsides of this for rural areas can be really quite significant, because there are going to be entire fields of careers that in the past wouldn't really have been seen as available or attainable for people in rural areas, but will start to actually become much more common. So we're starting to see really high value and growing sectors like cybersecurity and IT and similar, that would previously have meant that people would jump on the first train out of Dorset to go and work in London, are now getting right on the train and coming back to work from Dorset. And I think it's the opportunities like this for rural areas that we need to look at how we can capitalise on in order to deliver, a real digital future for people. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg. So, yeah, as we said at the beginning, we designed a workshop for using a number of facilitators and for an audience drawn from the council, from the local area, from businesses, people working from home, all of the kinds of areas that we were looking to address with these rural challenges that Greg's just set out, as a response to the government's roadmap to 5G report. We kind of felt it didn't go far enough, and we kind of felt that we needed to come up with our own response and some ideas about how we could start to address some of those issues. So we've started these workshops by asking facilitators from a number of different sectors and topic areas to address the workshop on what's going to be coming up over the next 10 years, what sorts of things are going to be possible. A lot of it was potentially aspirational thinking, but we didn't think that mattered too much. It was more about ideas for, as Greg said, how we could bring rural areas more in step with urban centres. And those topics covered public sector transformation, health and social care, education, business and industry, quality of life and entertainment, transport and tourism. And as I say, the workshop was really an exploration of how all those ideas could work in a rural context and what kinds of things we could start to implement. The other thing that was very clear, particularly in light of the fact that we've nearly come out of a very long lockdown period, was that there was quite a clear drive towards hybridization of a lot of things. So we wanted to draw out from those topics and these challenges areas of implementation that we could start to look at that would look at hybrid models for rural areas. And what I would say is that there was so much really good material generated from these workshops. We're still kind of working our way through it now. And what we're going to present here is just a canter through the highlights of this this workshop output that we generated, rather than everything. And I've just put in big capital letters there, hybrid, because I think that's probably the main takeaway from the workshop, which we saw as input from the facilitators. Also, massive great warning sign. I was going to say caveat, but that's not quite as dramatic. I like a good warning. This is, as I said before, quite aspirational thinking. It's not necessarily a presentation about what we are going to do. It's what we could do, and as I say, is presented as edited highlights. So the first area that we looked at with Dr. Deb Smart, who's one of the corporate directors for Dorset Council, was public sector transformation, on what areas we not necessarily are looking at the moment or have been looking at, but could look at it in future. We think there's a big piece of work to do around process analysis and research into what services would benefit from digitisation. Good example of this is kind of the public mindset shift away from calling the council constantly, rather than moving them to a first contact position of being promoting digital first, using contact forms and things. I think that would streamline services quite dramatically, and there is precedent for this from large companies. I mean, they do that all the time. Why can a council not be modern and forward thinking like that? We also thought we should look possibly at what digital solutions we can work on together with other councils, and need to form a kind of best practice forum, idea swapping for rural areas, maybe conferences to look at these kinds of things in more depth. As Greg pointed out earlier, connectivity and infrastructure, hugely important, and you'll see this as a theme running through all of these slides. And the other thing I would add here is that mapping all of those assets and that connectivity and coverage and things in a rural area is important. We're doing a bit of work at the moment with 5G Rural Dorset project, which is attempting to map everything in an asset hub. And I think from that position, you can then start to see exactly what's needed, where it's needed, and what solutions we can start to build in to provide that connectivity. Local support, I think an increase in activity around local areas is going to be good. We already run a very successful Digital Champions program, but what came out of the workshop very strongly was that we possibly need to expand that into Digital Champions for business, Digital Champions for healthcare, and a team that supports people in their local areas. It also means engaging much more with parish councils and providing local hubs, or working with them rather, to provide local hubs and facilitate change in their communities on a local level. And as I say, that's going to require far more two-way conversation with parish councils to close up that feedback loop. Again, another strong theme that came out through all topic areas actually was engagement with young people, particularly those that are still local, not necessarily off at university, and those staying at home, to help facilitate digital transformation in their areas. And we'll come on to a bit more of that in the quality of life part of this presentation. The police actually in this workshop raised this as an area for improvement. They seem to spend a lot of time signposting people to other areas. So we wonder whether there's a possibility of creating some sort of digital hub or directory that the council could maintain about where to find things, how to do things, who to talk to about things, rather than services that really shouldn't be dealing with those kinds of things, like the police getting called about I don't know what, but all sorts of things that they just need to send people away for. We also feel that a lot of these topics, there's a fairly big education piece to do with a multitude of council services about how people can engage with us more digitally. And one of our senior leadership team pointed out that that's going to require some real investment, not just in terms of finance, but in terms of appetite for that kind of change, programs to go out and reach people on a local and public level. Expanding the Digital Championship Programme, I've already mentioned just now, but into areas of business and healthcare. Again, this hubs for local co-working kind of ties into the local parish areas, and working with them to develop co-working spaces with, it could be a short-term fix, but providing better connectivity to co-working hubs and things, so that home workers don't feel quite so isolated, and can find space to work effectively and support one another if they're working from home, or if they're small businesses in a local area supporting each other. So that could be a school, hall, church, you know, any kind of local publicly accessible building. I also drew from this is kind of more a personal opinion than anything else, that actually if you're getting all sectors of a local area engaged with this stuff, it could actually help with the uptake of skills and training, which again feeds into the education piece. And finally, in public transformation, lobbying has come out fairly recently as something that we could look at as a council. It was pointed out by Deborah Smart that Project Gigabit funding's been cut, and we need to start finding ways to either get that funding back or find new hybrid ways of plugging those holes. The other thing that obviously we're involved in as a council is planning requirements and things, and could we look at requirements for things like connectivity and coverage when making planning decisions. Next topic area we looked at was health and social care. This was facilitated by Dr. Phil Richardson from Dorset CCG, and looked at a number of areas, things that we're already trialling in Dorset actually, but there is a wealth of opportunity to be explored. From remote monitoring, that's things like monitoring elderly residents' fluid intake, for example, how they move around the house to spot any differences in their daily routines, and kind of get ahead of any irregularities in order to kind of prevent issues with their healthcare. Also, remote consultation could be explored. Diagnosis and consultation has been used, I think, a lot over the last year for doctor's appointments and things, but there are devices available nowadays that can remotely measure things like blood pressure, oxygen saturation and things. That means that, particularly with vulnerable residents, the need for an in-person visit isn't necessarily always needed. But again, you know, it comes back to this point about connectivity in rural areas, and finding solutions for that really needs to be really sorted out, because, you know, you can't do those kinds of things if you don't have the connectivity to do it, or indeed the devices, which we'll come on to in a bit. There's quite a high cost to obviously kitting everybody out with home devices. So, you know, one of the things that came out of this was is there an argument for a bring your own device kind of model, or some kind of digital social security payment? We also provide vouchers for fibre connectivity. That's a government sponsored scheme, and I'm sure Penny and Rachel can tell us more about that. But why do we not necessarily as a council, but you know, as a nation, provide people with voucher schemes to sort out devices at home and things like that, particularly if there's such a need for them to be online all the time? There's an interesting example that came out of Aylesbury Council, I think, using Alexa to monitor people's health and social care remotely. And obviously, if they already have those devices, it's not quite such a big cost implication if we're reusing existing technology. The other thing that was considered was whether, if we're not kitting out people with devices at home, we could kit out visiting doctors with better connectivity and better devices, much like the flying doctors model in Australia. They could spend much more time on the road and not having to go back to base to analyse and diagnose and prescribe. They can do it as they are on the fly with better devices and connectivity. But again, there's an education piece here as well. I think if we had digital champions in healthcare as well as device usage, we could actually bring people on board with the benefits of using devices and remote monitoring social care. The next topic we moved on to is education. This was delivered by Mark Blackman, who is the corporate director for education at the council. And I think this was a really quite interesting one, because it diverged a bit from being a conversation around digital to being a conversation around how we can look at hybrid models to improve the educational day more generally, and less about digital and more about curriculum, which was kind of interesting. I think everybody will report that they've had various experiences of video teaching during the pandemic. And one of the first things that was mentioned was, well, actually, let's get the 360 feedback on this. Let's actually ask the kids what worked and what didn't. if it didn't work, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad idea. It just means that we need to look at hybrid options. So as I mentioned just now, a new model for the working day was something that was discussed, and maybe mirroring more closely what grown-ups do in an office, where meetings are lectures and deliverables are focus time and project work in the school. So that would see a shift away from face-to-face teaching in a classroom, just delivering lessons in the classroom that are absolutely necessary, and then spending greater time in digital labs, so students get proper focus time. But we felt this would need different ways of monitoring and facilitating. Obviously, you need more pairs of hands if you're monitoring and facilitating a lab as well as a classroom at the same time. But you know, when students are in focus time and in labs, it's much easier, I think, to have them in focus time. And what we can also look at is more use of things like chat boards. I think interestingly, during the pandemic, kids were quite good at actually sorting themselves out, getting on chat rooms themselves. I know my partner's son was on and off Discord the whole time, chatting with his friends. If we could use that kind of technology to enhance the classroom experience with teacher input as well, that could be another channel to use for educating. The other benefit of less class time, more online time, and more video teaching, of course, is that less noisy environments and labs are actually better for some students. Again, my partner's son is autistic, and he found it difficult during lockdown, but also that sometimes being outside of the classroom where it's noisy is actually much better for focus. The other benefit, of course, of moving a lot of these things online is the opportunity to measure metrics digitally. And you know, we can sort of mirror the e-commerce model where the metric is actually knowledge rather than a product. So how much was understood, how effective was the focus time, how did it translate into the output and the quality of the work that the student's doing. And it's an old adage, but if we can measure it, we can improve it. All of this kind of model fits very nicely with the move to coding and STEM curriculum that's becoming more popular in recent years. I mean, you don't stand in a classroom and teach coding. You have to have focus time. You have to have time to sit there and tap out code. So, you know, it's not necessarily a complete divergence away from where it's already headed. Interestingly and slightly controversially, Mark himself brought up the issue of homework and whether actually a newly structured day that focuses the student much more within the day would actually mean less need for homework. He felt quite strongly that a child's social and leisure education can suffer in the long term because of a long working day that just carries on at home. Another item I haven't added in here was also about whether, if we've got all of this information and we can track students' progress, whether we could actually start creating bespoke learning models for individual students. I don't know how much appetite there would be for that in the education system, but I think it would be certainly doable, technically speaking, at least. Business industry, another topic that we covered with Gordon Fong, who's a local managing director for a company called Kimcell, and also involved in the 5G rural Dorset work. Much like the public sector slide, he felt quite strongly, and so did the group, that actually local hubs for co-working and to involve home workers better is a good way forward. So we can look at that, certainly. And actually, one of the things that was discussed quite some length was that there's not much support in rural areas for things like e-commerce and marketing. So how do small business and small retailers get online and survive? And one of the ideas that came out of this was a need for an online community hub that could support local trade with a community focus to make things easier to find, easier to buy, easier to engage with, but also with a back-end support function that, you know, told the local chippy how to get online and get product online and get e-commerce and marketing sorted. But as with all these things, infrastructure and connectivity definitely very important. We need to look at kind of hybrid solutions. to be able to reach these smaller, more remote areas. Technology monitoring, also quite an interesting point. As we've said, particularly in the last year, working from home can cause burnout. And actually, I think if anybody measured their office day, they'd probably find that they only got about 5 hours serious hard graft out of an office day. If you work from home, you're much more focused. You can probably sit there for 10 or 12 hours with no, well, I was going to say no issues, but actually massive health issues. So there are now pieces of technology that can monitor your productivity and alert you when you're you know, in need of a break or in need of going for a walk and things. And this is again something we can use maybe the digital championship program for, with business champions, to educate people as to how to use that kind of tracking and alerting. Even Windows has basic functionality for that. Quality of life. This was a much more general discussion about the impact on one's quality of life when, you know, connectivity and digital isn't at the forefront. And one of the strong messages that came out of this was that we need to be engaging with young people to find out what life is like in rural areas without connectivity and during lockdown. There was also an interesting point made about whether we could make digital championship part of some sort of scheme like Duke of Edinburgh or other, and get young people engaged with the community, particularly if we're looking at developing local hubs. We're going to need their help to set things like that up. But I think that would need a very accessible program developed, so there's not a disconnect between you know, 20-year-old and an 80-year-old in terms of digital education. We made this point in the public sector transformation slide. Can we get involved in new build and planning requirements as a council, and you know, only grant planning permission where good connectivity, coverage, and capacity is part of the plan for the build. But of course, this has the negative effect of, you know, maybe facilities won't get built and houses won't get built if regulations are too onerous, and possibly this is a national fight anyway. But it's one that, you know, we can lobby towards, certainly. And as I pointed out just now, we have voucher schemes for fibre, so why not voucher schemes for mobile access or other rural broadband solutions? This could actually be a quite neat solution to getting local parishes creating their own working hubs and local facilities. And this group actually identified what they're calling the big five that make digital transformation truly feasible. Those things were motivation, so people actually want to get involved with it. Devices, hugely important. If they don't have a device, they can't. Oh, sorry, I've moved on. If they don't have the device, they can't do anything about it. Connectivity, but connectivity being connectivity, capacity, and reliability. If those three factors for connectivity aren't there, then this is not going to work. They need the skills and the training, and there's also the cost implication of all of this. So transport, quite an interesting area for me. I came from a transport background originally, so it was one of the areas that I actually understood. And it was, excuse me, it's clear that a lot of work has been done around what they call UTMC, which is urban traffic management control, and smart transport in urban areas, but not in rural areas. So what exactly happens when you travel to a rural location from an urban centre? How will this actually work in a rural setting with things like communications furniture, communications cabinets on the street, charge points, and so on and so forth? It's clearly less ideal to stick cabinets and things all over the place in a rural area. So some real thought has to be put, probably in conjunction with an engineering firm like Arup, who facilitated this subject for us, into how we look at a hybrid solution to what they're doing with urban, but kind of modelling it for rural areas, and providing us with something that's workable. And do we actually need a national policy for rural areas on smart mobility? I think the answer is yes. I think it's been quite ignored by government, so we can certainly help to lobby on that front. There was the idea of creating an app, actually, which covers a number of bases, and I'll rattle through this quite quickly because I'm aware we're running out of time. this app could provide a number of functions. It could make journeys easier. We can create an app that measures journey time monitoring, traffic information, overcrowding in tourist destinations and things, to help prevent people traveling to Lulworth Cove, for example, when it's already maxed out. But also go further than that and suggest alternative destinations for people who are looking to travel. It could also help, and I'll come on to this in a second properly, but end-to-end journey time planning. So if you're coming to Dorset from out of the region, maybe offering alternatives to transport, so using public transport, but with an end-to-end view. So it helps you along your journey. It tells you, how to get to the next destination in the most efficient way. And the only drawback to this really is that you'd have to provide physical facilities as well for luggage transport hubs, maybe even showers if they're covering the last mile on a bike, for example. So for local people, the subject of mobility as a service, MAS, was also looked at, and whether actually we can use this same app for things like car sharing models and that kind of thing, but also for on-demand kind of call-up autonomous services. So the Uber model, but with autonomous vehicles for maybe elderly or vulnerable people, or a better, more on-demand public bus service. But again, this needs some serious investigative work with the transport departments in the council to see what's already there and what is feasible. We've already talked about end-to-end journey time planning just now. The other thing that is a common thread through all of this stuff is mindset and education. So there's this concept of the 15-minute community, which basically says that anything you need is within 15 minutes of where you live. Now, that's not true in rural areas necessarily, but I think there's definitely an education piece around choosing walking or cycling over using the car for every single journey. The other interesting thing that Arup are looking at is data analysis into peak transport times. So they've been taking data from a lot of areas, Dorset included, I think, actually, and looking at how that's changed during lockdown. And fairly obviously, they found that there's been a decrease in traffic, but they've also found that as we start to emerge from lockdown, the peak times change. So can we start to look at the educational day and the working day and trying to stagger some of those times and move to online learning or home working more as a norm to be able to essentially avoid or maybe eliminate the rush hour. Lastly, tourism. This was facilitated by Jeren Clulo, who's one of our sister 5G projects up in Nottinghamshire, and they're looking at ways to deliver the story of Robin Hood and Sherwood Forest in a much more interactive way. One of the things that came out of this quite strongly was commercial aspects of tourism and using technology and digital to increase repeat visits and increase average spend. There was some talk about actually how you can reuse different environments at different times of year using virtual and augmented reality. So, for example, everybody visits Lulworth Cove during the summer, but very few people actually visit Lulworth Cove in winter. But it can still be very beautiful and still be very interesting. And can we look at developing some interactive experiences online that take advantage of that? The obvious questions are how would people engage with it, and how much would they actually be willing to pay for it? I think that's a less relevant question. I think actually if you can provide a 12-month all year round experience, either virtually or physically, then it actually increases repeat visits anyway. And yeah, increased use of augmented reality and virtual reality can be explored as bolt-on services. This is actually a park in Japan where it's not actually quite virtual, because obviously you can see there's a lady walking through here, but this is streamed online every night, and they turn it into a sort of a light show and art gallery, which essentially means the park is available to the public and virtually at least and profitable or turning revenue at least 24/7 potentially, because this is streamed online and accessible. Again, comms and connectivity came up as a huge area for improvement. Not necessarily, obviously, the same reasons, but emergency response is very important at tourist destinations, and so improved connectivity is going to be important. But also for back-end operations, so the ability to streamline businesses and run them more effectively. But that also includes things like the use of IoT devices to monitor things like stock levels in restaurants, or drive e-commerce and fulfillment, or even maybe using things like automatic number plate recognition for litter cams and things, which would all help towards enforcing local regulations. And also gate tagging, people leaving gates open in country areas and things. The other interesting thing along connectivity lines is that people don't necessarily look to holiday in rural areas like Dorset if they know they're going to be out of connectivity for a long time. So if you knew that the place you were going to had great connectivity, you might book a 2-week holiday and take a day in the middle to do a bit of work, if you knew that you had decent connectivity. And also, is it a blocker to new businesses and new tourist destinations starting up because of the lack of connectivity? They can't market as easily. They can't drive an e-commerce business quite as easily. So again, big area for improvement around connectivity. And again, a need to ensure that smaller business and smaller tourist destinations aren't left behind, much like we identified in the business and industry section. I think there's a need for some sort of online commercial hub that supports marketing and e-commerce, as well as advertising and revenue generation services. And that, believe it or not, was a quick rattle through our workshop. Over to you, Penny.
Thank you very much indeed, both to you, James, and to Greg as well. That so many ideas have come out. It's very hard to really know where to start in terms of prioritising, but that is what the facilitators are now going to be doing, pulling that great list into something more coherent, showing our goals and aspirations. And along with the connectivity, skills and leadership, we think we're going to need in order to make all that happen. And we hope that this will become a blueprint, a useful blueprint of what rural areas can achieve. We will be promoting our final report, if you're interested in receiving it, through our Digital Dorset e-newsletter. So please do sign up, go online, find the Dorset Council website, and you can sign up for our e-newsletters there. It's the Digital Dorset one. You can sign up to get updates on how we're getting on with this work. Sadly, I don't think there's very much time for questions. Does anybody have anything very quickly that they'd like to ask that we could help with? James, would you like to stop sharing maybe, and we'll...
It should have stopped. Or maybe it's not. Let's try that. Yes, that should have stopped now.
Yeah, that's better. Put your hand up either, or just unmute yourself and ask a question. There's very few of us here.
I've physically put my hand up. Yeah, I mean, I thought, it's a shame that there weren't more people on the presentation, because I think everything is such a broad area that came out from the workshop. I think it's tremendous. I think I'm involved in education. I'm a school governor, and as a secondary school governor, everything on the education list are things that we are looking at and working through, because we see it as a tremendous opportunity. The big issue, connectivity, and this applies to office workers as well. People don't.
Oh, I think we've lost Robin there. What happened? Robin, we can't hear you there. Well, Robin's trying to come back to us. Anybody else like to ask a question? No. I think we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for attending. I think we know a number of the people in the room. Sally, I don't know you, but special welcome to you, and thanks for joining us. If there is more that we can let you know about, or you have a particular question, please do get in touch. You can find us through Digital Dorset or 5G Rural Dorset on Twitter, for example. Thanks, Sally, for your message there. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and we will see you again, hopefully at another Digital Leaders session or something else soon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.